Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the commands and color system. And strangely enough, this was one of the first, Memoir 44 was one of the first war games that I played. And I have played hundreds and hundreds of different games and really enjoyed a lot of them. But I always find coming back to commands and colors. And it's mainly because of the simplicity of the system and the variety of mechanics that are found within the different systems, but still the base rules are essentially the same. Actually, all of them have a left, center, right of the board, and then you have section cards, which are mixed into a deck, and I'm going to guess somewhere around 50 to 60% of those are like section cards. And then you've got some tactics cards, and that's kind of where the flavor of each game comes in. And it's kind of amazing how each game system can be so similar, but like one thing can be changed or a couple things can be changed, and it adds so much to the game as far as like interest. So first, we're going to take a look at Battlecry, which came out in 2000, and that was the first one to come out. We're going to use Vassal to kind of take a look at the board and discuss like some of the mechanics. So Battlecry was one of the first ones to come out. The numbers of scenarios really weren't that many. I can't remember how many there were in the original game. I'm going to guess somewhere around 12. The number of units were very limited. There was leaders in it. The cards very flavorful for Civil War. But basically you're dealing with infantry, cavalry, and artillery. And that's the main premise of the game. And probably the biggest thing to learn about is terrain and how to use terrain effectively. And again, being the very first one of his games, there was not a lot of complexity here. It was a very nice introduction to it. And here you can see this is basically all the units that you have to worry about, and that's all the terrain. Now, the next thing that came out was Memoir 44. And it was kind of similar, but there was more terrain. So you have the infantry, tanks, and artillery. But the scale, like the feeling of the game is more zoomed in, or zoomed out. I'm sorry, like you're further away from the battle because this World War II and weapons have further ranges and stuff like that. So the base game is kind of similar to Battlecry with a lot of good flavor for Memoir 44, but the number of scenarios that people came up with was just absolutely incredible. So there were a lot of people out there designing custom scenarios and using this website to upload different battles that they had made for themselves or to share out with others. And you could do these with the base game, and then the terrain pack came out, and then the Russian front came out, and then the Pacific came out. I'm probably getting the orders all wrong, and there was another one, but it's just one thing after another. It just came like another expansion came. But each faction, each expansion had like one thing that changed. So, for example, on the Russian game, you had a chit, and basically you played the Russian player played one card in advance beforehand, and like you're playing your card for your next turn before the turn happens. So just that mechanic alone just drastically changed the game. It was really neat. And then the Pacific expansion, what I remember, my favorite thing about it was the caves. The caves were absolutely fun. The Americans had the gung-ho. The Japanese don't retreat from battle. So these are very flavorful things, but each faction, each expansion kind of just changed one thing that made it more interesting. And it was kind of cool how it changed the system. There's campaigns for this. There's a campaign book. You can play campaigns. Here's the army packs. You can see that. Different maps and boards. So you have the base board, which is left, center, right. And then you have deeper breakthrough boards, which are think about 17 hexes deep. So there's a lot more depth of play there. And then you've also got the Overlord or the Epic format. So a couple of the other systems, I think eventually even Battlecry got a couple of epic scenarios, and it allows 2 to 8 players to kind of play this together. But this was a system that really kind of brought to light how cool it was to have 2 boards side by side, and basically you divide the field up into 3, just like you would like a regular game, and let each player command a certain section of the battlefield. And they'd play cards, and then you'd have an overall commander who would issue cards to his field generals. So it was kind of a fun role-playing type, let's play a battle together and see what happens to this stuff. I highly recommend some of the paper maps that they came out with called battle maps. Everything's pre-printed, so basically you just pull it right out and you put your troops on there and you're ready to go. Very fun stuff. So going back to Memoir for a second, it really focused on the number of units. I'm sorry, not the number of units. A very small number of units, but a very large variety of terrain. And sometimes each faction had its own special rule that made it a lot more fun. And then came Command & Colors Ancients. So Command & Colors Ancients really focused on the number of units on the board and not so much the terrain. So here's a sample of Command & Colors Ancients. And just taking a look at the wide variety of different types of units here. You've got medium cavalry, light cavalry. You can have heavy cavalry. Yeah, here's a heavy cavalry. You've got light units, and you've got medium units, and you've got heavy units, not necessarily on the board here. More mediums. The upside down triangles are warriors. Squares are typically medium infantry. But let's take a look at the charts for just a second here. So Ancients really focused on units and how to use infantry or how to use cavalry, and then also leaders. So leaders really impacted the game a lot at this point. And it was really important to have a leader kind of at the center of a group of units. But the focus on the line battles and how line battles work in this game is really fitting for what I feel like was the tactics of the era. So like you want all of your guys in a line, and there are special cards that kind of help encourage your morale or encourage your ability to battle in the game just by staying close together in a line, having your leaders at the center. Leaders make everybody stronger. Just an amazing kind of switch from the same game system as Memoir 44, but like it's the total opposite in a way where Memoir 44, you've got units everywhere. You don't want them clustered together because like air power can come through and just wipe out a whole bunch of people. This one, you're focusing, staying together. Complete change, but the basic game mechanics are still kind of fundamentally the same. So now it's kind of moving on to the fantasy. So the same year that Command & Colors Ancients came out, Battlelore came out. And Battlelore is kind of, well, it is a fantasy version of Memoir 44. There was a lot of different variety in the units, a lot of different fantasy things in there. In the original edition, they had a campaign board that you can kind of focus on a particular aspect of magic, like a wizard or a medieval guy or something like that. But basically, you could choose your path on this little board and kind of work your way through it. But the most interesting mechanic that happened here was the concept of lore. So what the concept of lore did was it gave you the option to roll for a coin that was able to be used for certain cards. So you'll draw cards into your hand that are called lore cards, and you have to spend coins in order to play those cards. So if you're rolling an attack against somebody, even if you miss, and when I was like, there's 3 different colors to the game, right? So when you roll a dice and you're trying to attack a green guy, but there's a section of the die that is usually a miss, like a star in Memoir 44, and I can't remember the other ones in the other games, but you know what I'm saying, right? So you roll a star or a lore icon, and then you get a coin, and then effectively you'll get to play one of these lore cards, right? So you'll pay 5 coins to play this one, 5 coins to play this one. So even if you're missing a lot of times, you're able to build up this stack of coins in order to play these massive attack cards. So there's a kind of a cool balance that happens when this happens, because one guy's attacking, he's hitting, he's destroying the enemy, and then you think he's doing great, and the other guy's missing, but he's rolling like lore tokens, and he's got a stack of lore tokens, but you don't know what he's got in his hands. And then he comes out with this cool little magic feat, and is able to do like this bonus attack. So these are like really cool, really fun, and it kind of makes the game interesting for the guy who sometimes is behind in the game to kind of come back. The complexity of the terrain and the units gets a little tough here because everything matters in the game. So like if the unit's on a hill, it's only 2 dice in and 2 dice out. Crossing a river. So there's the complexity of Memoir 44 with the terrain, but there's also the complexity with the units. And there's also so many different types of units in this game. So it's goblins and lizards and all kinds of crazy fun stuff. There's giant spiders. And sometimes you'll see mechanics like for the giant spiders come back in other sections like Memoir 44 where the tiger tanks have the same mechanic, but it effectively works really well. If you're trying to kill a giant spider, it's very difficult to kill, so you roll 2 dice and you have to roll 2 hits in order to knock it out. Same thing happens with the tiger tank. And here's the board that I was talking about with the commander's board, when you can kind of increase the war council and decide which path that you want to go on. So this was a really fun game, really fun system, and definitely fantasy based. There was a medieval variant that was a lot of fun. So then came one of my favorites, which is Command & Colors Napoleonics. And this system, kind of like Memoir 44, just grew to be an incredible system. What started out to be just a base game with the British and the French grew to the Prussians and the Russians and the Spanish and the Austrians. And so there's a lot of great expansions. Each one of the armies has its own unique individual little things about it that are awesome. And the scenarios play at a truly wargamer level. So now this is called an epic format, basically. So this is a very busy map, but not all of them are this busy. But you can look at the different types of units here. You've got line units who are good at marching forward and attacking. You've got light units, which are good at going through forests and things like that. You've got field artillery. You've got heavy artillery. You've got heavy cavalry, heavy artillery, foot artillery, leaders, heavy cavalry. Just the number of different types of units in the game is incredible. It's just really amazing, all the different things. The interesting mechanic changed in this version is that the number of units that you have matters. So as you take hits in the game, it reduces your combat effectiveness. So if you're charging an enemy and you take a hit, you're going to roll less dice against somebody. Certain troops are better at attacking people in combat than others. So the line, he gets a +1 die per block, +1 die versus infantry. So let's say the line infantry is standing next to another unit, and he would typically roll 4 dice, but since he's in melee, he'll get an extra die. So the light will get 1 die per block, but if he's shooting or standing and shooting, he gets not in melee, he gets 1 die per block +1 die. So each one of the unit types has an advantage to be in that unit type in the battle. So it's really kind of cool how he went through all these different types and kind of said, this is what this guy can do, and this is what he's supposed to do. And so you learn a lot about the different types of units in Napoleonic warfare. And another kind of cool thing about this version is that you learn about squares and how infantry can form squares against cavalry attacking and why it's effective. And it'll like if you go into square, you lose one of your cards, which represents a loss of command over those guys because they're in square and they're harder to maneuver. So, of course, your command's going to be a little bit tougher to do. So it's a really amazing little concept. And then also, you've got a lot of terrain to deal with, too. So this combines like the complexity of Commands and Colors Ancients units with the complexity of Memoir 44 terrain, and kind of makes you realize how difficult this era was as far as understanding warfare just on a unit level. This isn't even like what was happening on all the campaigns and all the different coalitions and things like that. The number of games, let's go to the other one. So here's a better example of a smaller map to show you, but the number of expansions, the number of scenarios created by the expansions. So this is the Spanish one, and the Spanish one get guerrilla markers, as I remember, in the game, which is a lot of fun and very difficult to play as the Spanish. The Russian gets paper units, and at the beginning of the game you get to roll dice, and then whatever dice you roll you get to add to your units and help you out. I believe the Prussian get Iron Will, which makes their units stronger. It's just, could go on and on, but each one of these packs really only has one advantage that's different as far as the overall army goes that changes the whole game. And then you're still talking about the complexity of the different types of units and all the things that happen there. So a lot of great lessons here. And then they came out with the expansions for the General Marshals expansion, Tacticians expansion, which means more cards. The Tactician cards are specifically to each side, as I remember. I could be wrong on that. I think I am wrong on that. It does add a Napoleonic flair to it, but it kind of adds more tactical cards and things. And then you've got Overlord, of course, which is two boards hooked together. The bigger board that you saw earlier, that was the Overlord format, and they're just huge, big battles. 2 to 8 people, probably going to take you about 5 hours to play, but it's a lot of fun. Then there was a re-release of Battlecry 150th Civil War Edition. The big advantage to this copy is that it had 30 scenarios versus I think the 10 or 12 that came with the original one. The units were a little better. 2012 Samurai Battles came out with the Vesda version. So a cool thing about this version is that it had 2 different game systems with the same units. Plastic models, they were very difficult to assemble. They had an honor deck, which is kind of like the tactician deck, and that was very similar to the lore system introduced in Battle Lore. Then Battle Lore 2nd Edition came out. I wasn't too much a fan of this one, just because the units didn't just have that same fun feel to me. Didn't quite connect to the units like it did in some of the other games. The Great War focused on trench warfare, and it was kind of interesting that most games were not able to reproduce World War I type feeling without being good. Like it was always like a battle of attrition, right? And this game has a lot of really fun, flavorful cards that you can play on the other player. It's got that Battle Lore type mechanic where if you roll a miss or a star, you get a star and you get to pay those to do a tactical card. You'll roll stars and you'll basically collect these tactical cards and be able to play these cards as... so this one costs 0. This is over the top. Lost Messengers. So there's a lot of interesting things that are happening here that feel very World War I-ish inside the game by being able to play these cards. It is a tough game to get across these lines. So the very first thing that happens, there's like an artillery barrage that happens that can clear some of this up and make different pathways. So there's a lot of replayability, a lot of fun there, But you got to find a way to get across here and face these machine guns. You got mortars over here. So it's a very brutal, bloody game. Plus, you can take a look at the base game expansions here, or modules. You have 18 scenarios. A lot of them kind of have a very similar feel, and I think that's just the way the warfare was at that period. When you're looking at this scale of a trench versus a trench with wire in the middle, I think it would be tough to say that you'd reach the complexity level of like a Commands and Colors Napoleonics because the way the battlefields were set up. This is trench warfare. You're running out of the trench, you're attacking the other guy, you're just trying to break through and get in there and just wipe them out. You're chasing each other through these trenches once you get in. So it's fun, but it's a bit of a, I don't know, is cat and mouse the right word for it? But I don't know. Give it a try. It's a good one. Then you get tank expansions. And then the tank expansions is basically the same game with tanks added. So we can take a look at tanks. Oops. And the tanks are a lot of fun because they can break down, a lot of unexpected things because tanks were really not built to last back then. They were just pieces of tin going across a battlefield. And the last one I'm going to cover is Command and Colors Tricorn. There's also Medieval. Red Alert is good. It's also very much like Commands and Colors Ancients in Space because there's not a lot of terrain. There's like sometimes there's like meteors or like giant things there, but like planets, things like that. But for the most part, it is a very good space feel with a lore system built in on top of a Command and Colors Ancients type system, but without the line battle type of thing. So it's got a huge map. It's really fun, but let's cover Tricorn for a bit. So Tricorn is an absolutely great system, and one of my favorite mechanics in it is built into the chaos that comes from like the morale checks. So every time you have a full strength unit, let's say they have 4 figures in the unit, and you will have, if you take a hit, right, you're going to have to roll dice that equal basically your remaining blocks, and you have to roll a flag in order to stay on the board. Otherwise, you basically retreat back some. And I can't remember how many spaces. You don't run off the board always, but you can. But the retreat mechanic breaks up all these lines. So you're trying to keep all these guys together. You're trying to do like line attacks and just run across the field, and then the enemy just keeps pushing you back because the morale feature kind of enforces Revolutionary War type tactics, right? Americans did not want to go into battle. They weren't too happy about it. They weren't used to it. The British were very used to that type of warfare. There are tactical cards for the Americans and tactical cards for the British. And the unit types focus mostly on infantry. There's a bit of cavalry and a bit of artillery. And that at the beginning of each scenario, if you have artillery within range, you can do an opening cannonade, which basically they stand and fire at each other and kind of knock a few guys out in the front line, kind of break up their spirits a little bit, and then they go at it and attack each other. So that's pretty much it for the coverage of the evolution of Command and Colors. I have been really impressed with what Richard Borg has done with the system. It's an absolutely wonderful system. Again, I've got almost all of these, and every single one I enjoy for a different reason. And if there's like anybody that says they want to play a particular era, I can almost always pull out one of these Command and Colors things and play them. And remember the rules fairly easily because for the most part, it's still going back to that basic system of left, center, right. The way the dice work is almost always the same on every single system as far as how to apply hits. Some of them have lore cards built in and lore actions built in. So super easy to pick up. I hope you enjoyed the video. I apologize for the length of it, but I kind of wanted to talk about this for a long time and say how much I appreciate like the different changes that have happened in the system and how much better it's gotten. So it's nice to start at the beginning too, because I think if I started with Command and Colors Napoleonics, my head would have blown up. But I really like it now, and it all feels very connected and very much the same. So thanks for watching, and have a good night.